This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER story Huckleberry Finn from Mark Twain. VIEW-MASTER Reel 1, Picture 1. The Missouri shoreline of sand and trees drifted slowly past the two on the raft as the Mississippi current carried them along. "There's a town ahead," remarked the boy, nodding toward the shore. "Must be Goshen. We come a long ways, Jim, since we left Hannibal just a few days ago." "Being a runaway slave don't bother me," said the young black man. "But I don't want folks thinking I murdered you, Huck. I don't wanna be called a murderer. But I can show my face back to Hannibal and tell folks I ain't been murdered," Huck pointed out. "Long as Pap thinks I'm dead, he won't bother me. We just gotta hang together now, Jim, 'cause I'm your only evidence." Picture 2. "What was it like, living with your father on that island after he kidnapped you?" asked Jim. Huck shuddered. "Pap kept me locked up in that cabin of his, just one room, dirt floor, no windows. Only time he'd let me out was to go down to the river and check the fish lines. I remember the last day I was there. Pap had drunk hisself to sleep the night before, and I woke up hearing him hollerin'. In his sleep the devils was chasing him. I woke him up and told him he was all right, just having one of his fits. Pap accused me and sent me down to check the fish lines. I saw an empty canoe drifting along near shore. I grabbed it and hid it in some weeds. After breakfast, Pap said he was going to see the widow Douglas and Miss Watson and collect $1,000. He left in his rowboat. I busted a hole in the roof and climbed out of the cabin. There was a wild hog outside. I killed it with the axe and spread its blood all around inside the cabin. I left the bloody axe in there with some of my hair stuck to it, so when Pap came back he would think I was murdered. Then I jumped in the canoe and got out of there. And I was running away too, about that time," said Jim, "to keep Miss Watson from selling me." Picture 3. "For years before that, we all thought Pap was dead," Huck reminds. "Remember that night he showed up all of a sudden in my bedroom at the widow Douglas' house. Then he told her and her sister, Miss Watson, to give him $1,000 or they'd never see me alive again. He grabbed me and took me off to that island." Jim added, "I heard Miss Douglas asked Miss Watson, 'Where can we get $1,000?' And Miss Watson said, 'Sister, all we can sell is Jim.'" They both began to cry. "So then you up and left?" "Yeah, I figured surely I'd die if they were to sell me to the slave traders downriver to Orleans." "Then you happened to land on the island where I was hiding and building this raft. I found you laying there almost dead from a snake bite. I sucked the poison out and painted a hex sign on your chest for good luck. You saved my life, Jim. Now all we gotta do is get you to the free states. Cairo, Illinois, that's the nearest. The first money I make as a free man, said Jim. I'm gonna buy myself legal from Miss Watson. Picture 4. I sure have met a lot of different kinds of folks since I run off, mused Huck. Like that night in St. Petersburg when I left you on the raft and went into town to scout around. I took a shortcut in the dark across the big plantation, and the owner catched me. He was Colonel Grangerford. He took a liking to me and invited me to be his guest at the mansion. I sure was living in luxury there for a couple of days. Can you imagine me taking a bath in a real bath tube? I even had my own personal servant boy named Buck. Picture 5. That mansion was where the shooting broke out, wasn't it? Asked Jim. Yeah, there's this feud between the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons. Next day, one of the colonel's daughters eloped with a Shepherdson, and at night the Shepherdson men surrounded the Grangerford house and started shooting. The Grangerford men folks fired back through the windows. Buck and me was standing by the colonel. All of a sudden, a bullet hit him smack in the head and killed him. I lit out running and didn't stop till I got to the river. Picture 6. I sure was glad to see you then, Huck, said Jim. I was getting worried about you. I was glad too. We shoved off in a hurry, didn't we? We sure did. But we almost got into a real fix last night when those slave bounty hunters came by. I was scared. Picture 7. Both recalled the previous evening when a large scow approached their raft. 4 armed white men on it guarded 6 captive black men, runaway slaves. Jim, terrified, ducked into the wigwam shelter on the raft. Any men on your raft? A white man shouted to Huck. Huck thought fast. Just my pup. He's sick, well, it ain't anything much. Suddenly he began to cry. Please don't leave us. If you'll only give us a tow to shore, you won't have to come near the raft. Confound it, boy, your pap's got the smallpox, and you know it. Why don't you say so? Sorry to leave you, but we can't fool around with smallpox. Here. He put 2 $20 gold pieces on a board and gingerly reached it across to Huck, who tearfully said, Much obliged. As the scow pulled away, Huck grinned. Jim, we're rich. There was a splashing sound, and Jim's head emerged from the water at the edge of the raft. Huck helped him aboard. You're a doggone good actor, Huck smiled Jim. Even if you are a liar, thanks. He laughed. Were they scared? VIEW-MASTER Reel 2. Picture 1. Card sharps, river hustlers, selling snake oil and using a deck with 5 aces. I hope you're drowned. The riverboat captain leaned out of his pilot house window and shouted angrily down at 2 middle-aged men who had been hustled off the boat by indignant crewmen and now stood in ankle-deep water near a small sandbar in mid-river. The taller of the 2 men drew himself erect and glared up at the captain. Sir, you will rue this day, he proclaimed in oratorical tones. May your cruel fate forever haunt you. As the two carried and dragged their baggage to the sandbar, Jim and Huck's raft approached from upstream. "Ahoy!" called Huck. "Do you need any help?" The tall man pulled out a handkerchief and began to weep. "Alas," he blubbered, kicking his companion slyly in the shins, he whispered, "Cry, you idiot." He continued sobbing. "What help can you give us when fate was brought us so low? I'm the rightful King of France, and my illustrious colleague here is the Duke of Bilgewater. Can we fetch you down to the next town?" offered Huck. The pair stopped, wailing as suddenly as they had begun. "Since you insist." The tall man's tone changed to one of command. "Have your manservant towed our things aboard?" "What should we call you?" asked Huck, helping the men aboard the raft. "Your dukeness and your royal kingship." "Just call me king and call him duke." Picture 2. That evening, as they camped by the riverside, the king announced, "I have a brilliant idea. You two are now members of my Royal Shakespeare Touring Company." He turned to the Duke. "Bilgewater, fix me some new posters and tickets." For 2 nights only, David Garrick the younger and Edmund Kean the elder, direct from London, in their celebrated performance of the Royal Nonsuch by Shakespeare. The trunk belonging to the king and duke held an unbelievable assortment of things, from changes of costume to a small printing press. The duke got busy, and by the time the four arrived at the next town, Clairville, the posters and tickets were ready. Picture 3. The king put the other 3 to work tacking up posters around town. While supervising the duke, he noticed another poster. "Wanted, dead or alive, runaway slave, $800 reward." The king studied the description of the runaway, glanced down the street toward him, removed the poster, folded it and tucked it into an inside coat pocket. Then he gathered his 3 followers, led them to the town meeting hall, and began his spiel on its front steps. "Dear citizens of Clairville, allow me to introduce myself. I am David Garrick, the younger of the Royal Haymarket Theatre, London. My illustrious troupe and I will present a newly discovered play by the immortal bard, William Shakespeare, the Royal Nonsuch, admittance to men only." Men in the crowd eagerly queued up to buy tickets. They surged into the hall. When it was full, the king suddenly ordered the duke, Huck and Jim back to the raft. He stepped out in front of the curtain to thunderous applause. "Let the play begin," he proclaimed. He ducked behind the curtain, made a dash to an open rear window, climbed out and sprinted toward the waiting raft. "I was a triumph," he painted. Leaping aboard, shove off. Picture 4. At the next stop, Barrytown, the king dropped in at a saloon while his followers put up more posters. The conversation at the bar was about a Mr. Peter Wilkes of the next town downriver, Jackson's Landing, who had just died, leaving all that money to his brother, the Reverend Mr. Wilkes of Sheffield, England. At the word money, the king's ears pricked up. He began asking questions about the Wilkes family. stealthily writing down the answers on his shirt cuff. Rushing out of the saloon, he rejoined his 3 associates and ordered, "Down with the signs, forget Shakespeare. The greatest drama of our careers beckons us in the next town." By the time they reached Jackson's Landing, the trunk had produced a complete new wardrobe. The king and duke were dressed as clergymen. Huck wore a British-style velvet suit. Jim was to be a Sikh Arab and stay undercover on the raft. His black face and hands were painted blue. "Now remember, Bilgewater," prompted the king, "you are my brother William Wilkes, and you're deaf and dumb. And you," pointing at Huck, "are our young ward Percival." The sonorous toot of an approaching river-board jerked them to attention. "Hasten," snapped the king, "the stage is set." Picture 5. A crowd was at the landing to greet the boat. The king, duke and Huck, carrying their bags, managed to slip on board without being noticed. Then they turned around and joined the stream of passengers who were disembarking. At the top of the gangplank, the king loudly cleared his throat and pronounced his departing speech. "Farewell, fellow voyagers. Bless you, bless you." Picture 6. Everyone aboard and on shore stared as the 3 descended the gangplank. At the bottom, the duke impulsively knelt and kissed the earth. This action took the king by surprise, but he was equal to the occasion. "Arise, William," he intoned. Then he turned to the ground. "My poor afflicted brother is expressing his great gratitude for our safe arrival in the New World. From our tedious pilgrimage all the way from England, Sheffield, England." Picture 7. Heads nodded in the crowd. "I told you so," said a woman. "Reverend Wilkes," said a man. A sympathetic appearing man stepped up to the king. "Reverend," he said solemnly, "I hate to bring bad news, but your brother Peter passed away just yesterday morning." The king gasped and burst into tears. "Alas, alas, our poor brother gone." He turned to the duke and made a series of fake sign language gestures. The duke also began to sob. The king peeked slyly at the notes on his cuff, and our poor orphan nieces, Mary, Jane, and Susan. What of them? VIEW-MASTER Reel 3. Picture 1. Mary Jane, 19, and Susan, 15, whose mother also had died a few years ago, greeted Uncle Harvey and Uncle William with tears of thankfulness. They found young Percival attractive, even though all he would say was "Ratu." "Father left a letter containing his will," said Susan, as they ate dinner that evening. She brought it to the king, who slit it open. "Your dear father has left this house, its furnishings, and $3,000 in gold to you, his daughters, the tannery, and another $3,000 in gold to poor afflicted William and me," he announced. "The gold is hidden in 2 sacks under the floor in the cellar. We will go down and get it to protect it for you. Gesturing to the Duke, he led the way. The two bounded down the stairs into the cellar, and in a few minutes reappeared with the 2 sacks of gold coins. Later, as they all relaxed in the dining room, the king, puffing a big cigar, urged Mary Jane and Susan to accompany their uncles to England to live. Waving aside their objections, he announced, "Then it's all settled. Tomorrow we auction off the house, the furniture, everything." Picture 2. Huck, lying in his attic bed, couldn't sleep. He heard the snores of the king and duke in the guest bedroom below, and knew they had taken the gold to bed with them. He thought of pretty, trusting Mary Jane and Susan. "I've played along with these scalawags long enough," he told himself. "Somehow I gotta stop 'em. First, I gotta get that gold and hide it in a safe place for the girls." Noiselessly, he crept out of bed, made a rope of the sheets, opened his window, threw the rope out and let himself down to the window below. It was open. Quietly he climbed inside. The king and duke lay with the gold bags between them, making a hump under the covers. How could Huck get the gold without awakening them? He had an idea. He pulled a folding knife from his pocket, crawled under the bed, and slit the mattress directly under the hump. A minute later, in a flurry of goose feathers, he crawled out, clutching the 2 sacks. He tiptoed out of the bedroom, down the stairs and into the parlor, where the coffin of Peter Wilkes lay in state. He opened the lid, put the sacks inside and closed the coffin. Picture 3. Suddenly Huck heard a door opening upstairs and saw a glow of candlelight on the upper landing. Terrified, he hid in a dark corner of the parlor. Mary Jane and Susan, in their night gowns, entered the parlor and knelt, weeping, to pray before their father's coffin. Watching them, Huck felt his own tears hot on his cheeks. Picture 4. The king's shouts awoke the household next morning. "The gold, it's gone! We've been robbed! That little swindler, Percival, is gone too. He took it." The uncles hurried to the sheriff. While they were away, Huck stole back to the house and told the girls, "I can't live a lie no more. I ain't English, and them two ain't your uncles. They're a couple of river sharks. I took your gold and hid it inside your father's coffin. Say nothing and leave the rest to me." That afternoon the auction began. The porch was piled with household articles. The king began to auction off a sterling silver tea service. Huck was hiding under the porch steps, directly beneath the duke's feet. Cautiously, he took 2 wooden matches from his pocket. He wedged the head of one firmly into the duke's show, then lit it. "Going once, going twice," intoned the king. "Oh!" screamed the duke suddenly, hoping in pain and grabbing his shoe. "Somebody give me a hot food! Oh!" The crowd was shocked. "Thought he was supposed to be deaf and dumb," said one man. "He's a fake," muttered another. In the midst of the confusion, two strangers arrived, two gentlemen in clerical garb. One asked in an undeniable British accent, "Is this the Peter Wilkes residence?" Mary Jane and Susan ran and flung themselves into the men's arms, crying, "Uncle Harvey, Uncle William!" The sheriff, pointing a shoot-gun at the king and duke, stepped out of the crowd. "All right, you two, off to jail." Picture 5. Darkness was falling as Huck ran happily toward the river. But when he reached the raft, Jim was gone. Nearby lay a poster, "Runaway slave, $800 reward." For hours Huck searched. At last, long past midnight, he came to a clearing surrounded by a high, strong wire fence. Armed guards sat around a campfire in the center. On the ground lay a dozen black men, bound to stakes and hog-tied by ropes around their necks, hands and ankles. One was Jim, lying prone behind the fence near Jim. Huck poked a long tree limb through the fence and tapped Jim on the shoulder to get his attention. He smiled at Jim, opened his knife, took aim, and expertly threw it at a log near Jim's head. The knife stuck firmly. Jim worked his wrist ropes against the blade until his hands were free, then cut his other ropes. Meanwhile, Huck had pried up the fence and Jim silently slipped under it. The two scurried away into the darkness. Picture 6. It was almost daylight as they ran toward the river. Behind, in the distance, a baying chorus sounded. "Bloodhounds," said Huck. "Let's change shirts." As Tim complied, Huck added, "Reft just down this hill, hid in the tall grass. Claeros just 5 miles down on the other side. Get going, Jim, and goodbye. All kinds of luck to ya." They shook hands warmly, and Jim darted toward the river. Huck began trailing Jim's shirt on the ground and rubbing it on trees and shrubs to confuse the hounds. Picture 7. The sun was rising as Huck climbed to a hilltop with a clear view of the river. Far away, in mid-river, halfway to the free side, he saw his friend's raft, which now was barely a shimmering dot on the sun-drenched Mississippi. As tears started down his cheeks, Huck laughed joyously. "It's all over, Jim. You're a free man," he said to the speck on the river. "And we're gonna be partners someday."